potentially not very visible is that you need to pitch somewhere along the line, because ultimately we're just making pictures, right? And you've got the scale of the entire city, and yet you're representing a cable which may be 6, 8, 12 inches in diameter. So the answer is yes and no, if I could put it that way. The cables, we're not absolutely certain, but typically stay cables are sleeved, which means they sit within a high-density polyethylene pipe that can be coloured. The reason I think there was a sub clause to this question was saying you can see the telecom from 3 miles away. Those stays are white, and the 3 miles issue depends on which direction you're looking in, because whether it's set against the sun or away from the sun. So there are a lot of variables. So I think we're pretty good with the accuracy of our renderings from the position where the renderings have been set. But at some points you will see them and some others not. I think the thing I would say is that there's a sort of hierarchy within cable stayed bridges. Ultimately, the tower is the most physical element, of course, but that sort of triangular form of the stay cables is also visible. I mean, what I think is very interesting is how little material, these are strings, and they're many feet apart, and they're only inches in diameter, but actually they form, in your mind, they form a plane. They're both visible and invisible at the same time. That's probably not very helpful to you, but that's where we're at. And then the third question, I think this is an interesting question. I don't know whether we have interpreted this correctly. I mean, of course, the sun path is such that walkers and bicyclists on the south side path will receive no shade from any of the structure, because the structure is to the north of them, and there will be no shadow cast from the structure. And on the opposing side, on the north side, the structure will cast shadows, but it's only incidental to where the arch rib or the cable stayed structure is casting that shadow. So again, there is very little. It's incidental, I would say, would be the shade. So these are not designed to create shade, and there's a minor differential between the two sides, and there's a minor differential between the types, but they are all, I don't want to say insignificant, but they are all incidental. So that that's my take on that. And if we've misinterpreted that question, obviously we'd like to hear that and see what the ask is. So hopefully that covers those three.
Thanks, Keith. We'll just roll right into Megan, and then we'll pause at the end for further questions.
Next. Great, thank you. Next slide. Okay, Keith, I think I'd like to bring you back one more time to answer the question about animation and videos. Just wanted to note that really appreciate Beam for looking at ways that we can respond to the comment we received last week, that this group and the general public would really benefit from seeing these options in motion. So just, Keith, could you explain a little bit about how the team is, what the team is doing to work on being responsive to that request?
Yes, well, we are reacting to it. We're working pretty hard on getting those underway. And we will deliver some video that we hope that you will find delightful. The only caveat, and I don't want to be, over technical in this forum, and you don't want to hear my problems, but it's a number crunching issue. So I just want to, in terms of managing expectations, I just want to let you know that animations don't create themselves. They take a lot of number crunching time. We had when we scoped what it would take to produce 8 options for, let's say, a half-minute runaround. The processing was many thousands of hours. We don't have many thousands of hours. We have much less to get this delivered on time. So, I hope that you will get a great impression, but you may be not getting the full route that you might have hoped for with driving up and down in all directions. But certainly you'll get something that will aid and abet your deliberations.
Thanks, Keith.
Again, just really appreciate the team coming together and making this happen in time of our summer outreach. We have a wonderful team. So next question about weathering steel and a concern about how we would respond to graffiti. On the weathering steel, I'll just note that graffiti is something we deal with all the time. I think we have one person on our bridge maintenance staff that only does graffiti maintenance. Like, that's his only job. It is a real challenge. So we are doing our best to implement some anti-vandalism mechanisms on the bridge, but graffiti will happen, and we just have to address it as it comes up. But we are very familiar and very responsive to that issue and concern. The next question is really about the ceiling aspect of the arch. And sheeting. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure.
That is when weathering steel bleeds onto the surfaces below it and leaves stains. Yeah. So staining might have been a better...
I will have to get back to you on that one. My apologies. Dang, Steve.
How are you?
The next question is about the roof or ceiling aspect of the arch. Will there be opportunities to make those feel less solid in their experience crossing the bridge? So we will be refining the arch ribs as we move forward into the next phase of the project. That being said, what you are seeing today should be considered reasonable illustrations of the concept. So, but that is something we will be refining, not only the arch bracing, but also the arch ribbing. We still have some more work to do on that if the arch is the option that's selected to move forward. The next question is about earthquake resilience. Which bridge would be the most resilient? We are holding each option to the same standard, seismic design criteria, so that shouldn't be a factor in the design, in the selection process. And next, can we provide more information about carbon analysis for each of the different types? We certainly can, and we can bring that back to this group in August. That's a good question. On the next page, there was a lot more exploration in the profile of the towers, both elevation and circumference. Could we explore this in a later stage? Again, yes, definitely. We are looking for, with whatever option is chosen, we are going to be looking to refine the shape of particularly the tower and the arch ribbing. But in general, the tower height itself will be set at this phase of the project. But there are other elements still open for refinement. The next question is, can we see more views of the bridge deck? It looks like there's a gap where the cables come down. Would love to see more views of the deck to see if it is continuous. So we absolutely can provide more graphics that show the deck. I think in general, if you consider the gap that you may find on the Tilikum Bridge, is with the cable stay towers, it could be representative of a gap that you may find on a cable stay structure here. Is there a complete and total separation between pedestrians and the cars? What does that look like? We also can bring more views of kind of the particulars of the area of the bridge where there might be a modification to just the general desire or our plan that we have to separate bikes and peds from vehicular traffic. So wherever possible, they will be separated. There may be times across the movable span perhaps where it may be less so, but we will know more details as we advance the project. Now, which of the bridge types will be harder for trespassers to access and climb? People climb our bridges. I'm not going to hide that. They're very athletic and determined, and we do our best to identify and respond and then deter. So we will be looking at ways that we can prevent that from happening. For example, on our newer bridges like Selwood, there's certain fences you can place on, say, the bottom of an arch that really prevents people from walking up the arch. So we'll use as modern options such as that, but there are very determined people out there. So on this next question about ice, if I could ask Keith to come back one more time. I know, Keith, you have a lot of experience with ice shedding on bridges, and I will note that in Portland, we don't have as much dramatic ice events as other areas of the country, but I know, Keith, that you have a lot of experience in this area. If you want to speak to this particular question a bit.
Yeah, well, you're right. If I had $1 for every ice conversation that I'd sat through. So what happens on cable stayed bridges is that you can get ice build up on the cables, and then with vibration that they delaminate, and then wind catches them and takes them, and because they're shaped as a like a half pipe, they carry on the wind. And there are a lot of examples of that happening, but what you can't really do is predict where that ice will fall and what damage it will do. My suspicion is that there'd be very little evidence within Portland of that happening. But on other types, if you get ice build up on structure over the deck, so for example on bracing between two arches, or in fact on bracing between two towers, you get a potential for ice falling to deck. But it sounds like the boogeyman. Actually, the incidence of closures or the incidence of ice causing damage is very infrequent. I think the real question is what's the frequency, and does ice cause operational stoppage? So do you have to close the bridge for a day or an hour or whatever it is to clear ice? So it's a big question, but it's a statistical answer really rather than a technical one. But I'd be delighted if you'd join me for another 8-hour workshop on ice shedding.
Thank you, Keith. Next slide, please. All right, just a few questions left. Which option will be less hospitable to birds, thus not as expensive to maintain? In general, elements with horizontal, bridges with horizontal elements are more attractive to birds, so you could say the cable stay is less hospitable to birds. And then finally, the inside and outside railings we saw look the same for all bridge types. Is this the railing design that we'll be moving forward with no matter what the bridge type recommendation is. So the answer is right now, those are just placeholders, and railing options and type are going to be reviewed in the next phase, and we'll be getting input on those as well. So right now we're just doing our best to pick a good option to include in our estimating and graphics. Is that all the questions? Okay.
It is from last week, and there were a couple that were emailed in, so a couple of those might have seemed new. Thank you, Keith and Megan. And now I want to just open it up to the room if there's any further questions on their answers, or just more questions from last week on the range of bridge types, what we looked at. Want to be able to just pick that conversation back up. And so I'll go ahead and start with Carol and then Bob.
Okay. We were talking about bridge lengths the last time we met, and I guess I wondered about the function of buses and then also the future use of streetcars on the bridge, which we talked about, I think, in our first meeting. Does the length of the bridge itself have anything to do or impact the function of that infrastructure? And then also any and seismic integrity of the bridge based on using more infrastructure on the bridge, like the streetcar, for instance. Mm-hmm. So, did that make sense?
Yeah, it made sense. Megan, do you want to?
Yeah, I thought, oh, why did I sit down? My bad. So to answer your question about the streetcar, it does not impact the seismic resilience of the bridge. What we do is just account for that additional mass as we design the foundations to withstand the swaying of back and forth. Mm-hmm. And can you repeat the first half of your question again? I'm sorry.
I wondered if, thank you. I wondered if the length of the bridge had anything to do with better functioning of the streetcar, for instance, if we add that.
The length of the bridge does not relate to the streetcar. However, there is one area of the S curve that brings everybody onto the bridge today from the east side that we do need to massage to make sure it can accommodate the streetcar. But the length is largely driven by the existing starting point, end point that's out there today. We wanted to match existing, essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you. And real quick, my apologies. We wanted to have Carol come join us for this part of our conversation. She's going to co-facilitate with me for our discussion. So Bob, and then I think Gwen, and then Todd. No, Todd, and then Gwen.
Just a quick technical follow-up on the cable stayed. Do we know what the exterior material is going to be? On a telecom crossing, it was a Teflon coating, which really helped remove ice buildup just because it had less friction. The ice could build up on that as a material. It may be premature in terms of your work, but that was my question.
Keith, do you have thoughts on that one? Unfortunately, Steve's not here to weigh in.
Yeah, I do have thoughts, but I don't have jurisdiction. I don't know the answer right now because I mean one thing that's interesting to me, at least from a European perspective, is that with Buy America, etc. That the cable specifications that are open to you are less than would be open to me. So I don't, the engineers will have a better handle on that. But you're right, there are coating options. But I would also say, just what seemed to be implicit in your question was that they affect ice buildup, but it's a marginal question, a marginal technical issue. In fact. That it's a sort of slippage ratio coefficient, but I don't think it would drive that choice.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, so I have Todd, Gwen, and then Brian.
Yeah, this may be a question for you, Robert, over at the Willamette Light Brigade. Is there a design that is more conducive to lighting and aesthetics? I was in Milwaukee last summer, and they have a bridge lighting program that's actually dialed into a computer with songs. You know, it basically has this whole lighting program to it that I think is in other cities. So I was wondering, just from your standpoint of what you do with the bridges, is there a design that's easier, better, could be open to more really creative sorts of lighting sorts of programs?
Great question, and the short answer is it really depends on what's the final selection of the type, meaning the lighting chosen will probably respond to cables and towers, a different design response than bowstrings and tension rods and whatnot. The programmability, though, of the lighting would be something that I would advocate both for an aesthetic value, but also the dynamic qualities of light changing helps to reduce the impact for birds rather than a static light and a white light. So the dynamic qualities help, we found that on the Tillicum crossing, reduce bird strikes and other environmental issues. So there's kind of two parts you can think about it.
I guess it's all about how much money you have to spend to light a bridge.
You're in for a penny, you're in for a pound kind of a approach, and we would hope that the team, as they make their selections, begin to also advance what would be within the budget and within the program to have a really top-notch, high-quality lighting component for the bridge. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think Keith popped his hand up during this conversation. Keith, did you want to chime in here?
I did, just very briefly. I mean, there is a fundamental difference insofar as I showed you a slide last week that indicated a material difference between a Cape Stay tower in concrete and an arch rib in weathering steel. Just from any lighting point of view, weathering steel, because it's a matte finish, it has very low reflectivity. That's going to be harder to light. You're not going to get the same opportunities that you would on a concrete or a painted steel structure, because it will absorb that light. So yes, in my mind, there's a great difference, but there's a lot of bridge. So who knows whether you'll be wanting to light that piece of superstructure? Perhaps not.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, then we have Gwen, Brian, and then Aaron.
Thanks. So at the risk of being the weathering steel skeptic persistently, I guess to follow up on the graffiti question is, I understand the graffiti will be cleaned up, and that is great. But I'm wondering if graffiti cleanup on weathering steel is a subtractive process or an additive process. And if a subtractive process is used on that steel over decades to clean up graffiti, does that compromise the steel at some point? I know it's a lot of steel, so maybe it doesn't. Maybe the average amount that's taken away from it every time you clean it isn't that significant in the face of something that massive, but I just keep wondering about how this is going to play out over a long time.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, more or less whether the cleaning deteriorates the steel. Okay. Is that a Megan or a... Yeah.
I think we'll have to get back to you. And any questions today that we're not able to answer in this moment, we can absolutely email out the response after this meeting.
Thanks, Gwen. Okay. Brian, Aaron, and then Fred.
Hi. My question relates to kind of the deck level as it crosses I-5. And currently there's the cyclone fencing that prevents objects to be thrown over onto the highway. And it's pretty tall. I don't know how tall, maybe 12 feet. And it bows inward. I was curious with all these schemes if there's kind of a stance or a design thoughts as it relates to how those barriers are being designed and adapted towards each scheme? Or perhaps, so I'm just curious where that might be in the design phase.
It's definitely something that we would look at in the next phase. We are required to have that fencing over ODOT facilities, but how we approach that is a bit open-ended.
Okay, Aaron, and then Fred.
Thanks. I think my question is in a similar vein to the last one. I understand why we're focused on this part of the bridge, but we spent a lot of our time talking about 1/3 of what is a much larger bridge. And I guess I'm wondering at what point we might start talking about the rest of it, or maybe a better way to phrase that is, are we to assume that the rest of the bridge is unaffected by any of the decisions we make here? And the cross-section that we saw many months ago, are we to assume that that is consistent across all the schemes? And this is like a 5-part question. With all the schemes we were looking at last week, they had a range of color-coded impacts on cost, and they weren't all the same. And I guess I'm wondering if the selection at this point has any impact on the design decisions that are available down the road for the other 2/3 of the bridge.
Okay, Megan, I'm hearing, do you have it?
I may need some help.
Okay. So it sounds like we want to hear how this decision around the east approach, one, whether or not the group will be having conversations about the west approach as well as the mid-span, so the rest of the bridge. We'll start there.
Okay. I want to maybe invite Carol to come up and speak to how maybe the decision of the east approach is being worked into the decisions that are upcoming that integrate the whole bridge. You have thoughts?
It should be
that?
on.
I'm not sure this mic is working.
You want to tap it again? Yeah.
Is it working?
Just go closer in. Yeah.
Oh, I think this is working now.
Yeah.
Okay. It was an interesting process when we first started out, sort of the decision that's imperative about choosing the right east span, and there's a lot of focus and attention being paid to that. And then when we started the CDAG meetings, we said, everybody's going to want to know about the rest of the bridge. It isn't one bridge, it's 3 bridges, and it's an entire bridge, and there's pedestrian and vehicular components to it, and so there's a bascule. All of this is being worked on right now. There's been work that's advancing that isn't necessarily as pertinent to the conversation right now. And Keith, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like when we get this east segment decided, that there's going to be decisions that will unfold that have implications for the entire rest of the bridge. So it's an important milestone, but anybody that's worked on really complicated and difficult projects, you don't want to just solve it one piece at a time. You're coming at it from a holistic standpoint, but sometimes you need to pause, and let something else catch up that's a really important driver. So I believe that's what we're doing. These lights, does this happen? They do bird strikes in the room.
Thank you, Carol.
Does that answer the question?
I think it actually answered or hit on 2 of your questions.
Maybe. So then, just to clarify, you're saying at some point before we make the final decision about this, we're going to have one of those pauses and look at the rest of the bridge and its impact? It feels like that's an important thing to understand. No.
I don't think that is the process necessarily, but there's a lot of work going on in the background that is about the bridge in its entirety. Like there's a whole bascule team that's doing nothing but looking at that. Because there's so many different programmatic elements, there's the operator houses, there's the lift itself, the dimensions. Every foot is important in this bridge. So there's a lot of work that's going on, but I think the fine tuning of the design really comes once we get this east segment selected, and other character defining features of the bridge will, probably be very different from one to the other. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, how are you feeling about that? I think when she said the moment of pause, she was talking about the pause to make the bridge type selection for the east approach. We taking time to do that before we can let everything else unfold.
It just seems difficult to make a fully informed decision without understanding all the other pieces of the puzzle, I guess. So we've spent a ton of time on this, and I believe it's important, but I just want to make sure we know what the potential ramifications down the line are for the decisions we make now.
There was a part to your question about assuming the cross-section. I believe that existing cross-section hasn't changed in a while. So there's also small nuances about where the lighting goes, or traffic barriers, and things that nudge the bridge width, one way or the other. And that's a lot of the background detail that has to go on.
Thanks, Carol. Thank you, Erin.
Cassie, I think there's the last question about cost. I just wanted to clarify that if we make a decision on the structure type in this moment, that is maybe a bit more expensive than the baseline. It doesn't mean the budget for the rest of the bridge must then drop to compensate. So if that answers your question.
Okay. We're going to Fred, Gwen, Jason, and then Susan. Oh, I'm sorry. Keith, I can't seem to see if your hand is up because you're off screen a little bit. So just before we jump to Gwen, I don't want to make sure Keith has a moment to chime in.
Yeah, just very briefly to the point about the rest of the bridge and the design. I mean, of course, that's working at a pace as well. But from your perspective, just make out 2 points, is that the east span is by far the most significant visual aspect of the bridge. It's the thing that somewhere down the line, when everybody says, oh yeah, the Burnside, that's the one with the, and then they'll make some shape with their fingers probably. But the interaction with the rest of the bridge is effectively neutral for this. That you can add this part to the other part, and it will not be significantly different generically at the moment. I mean, the real issue is how does this part land on that first in-water pier, and that is something that we are constantly thinking about and dealing with. But for example, the experience from on the bike and bed path will be the same because the structure is inboard, and as a user you're on the outside. So I think you can rest assured that the rest of the bridge is not generically affected by these options. They are in detail, but not in principle.
All right, thanks, Keith. Oh, Fred, you're up. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we now have, have I got on? I think I'm on. We now have 3 unique bridge types to make a selection on, with the addition of the extended longer arch. That also presents 3, I think, unique construction or constructability challenges. And so I'm interested in knowing whether the committee will get some feedback from the constructability issues, whether there's any difference with the 3, particularly in regard to several things: the movement of materials, construction materials onto the site, and I'm referring primarily to the east end, what you're looking at there, and whether or not there will also be more frequent freeway closures for the construction, or rail closures, or more importantly, street closures on the west side of one option versus the other as far as construction. So I don't know whether we'll get that feedback soon, or whether that'll carry through the public input process. I noticed by the survey that there's just 2 choices for the public. Are we going to now say they have 3 choices as far as preference? So.
Right, so we have been working very closely with our contractor, BBP, to understand the construction issues for each of the options. That ultimately rolled into some of the screening criteria of specifically cost and schedule. A lot of the construction methods really drive cost and schedule, and I'll have Jen speak about her thoughts on the topic too. But we didn't plan on providing that level of detail during the summer outreach, but we can certainly follow up and provide that additional detail in August if that's helpful to make the decision. And it's certainly, as we approach making the decision, those details are critical between the final 2 options. Like, we want to provide those. But I'll have Jen speak a little bit on her thoughts.
So we did take a look at staging and phasing, and one of the things that I'll preface this with is that, construction takes a small amount of time in the overall duration of the life cycle of this project. So for both options, we'll have constructability issues to work through, but it's a short-term impact for something that you guys are going to have in your city for, for a century, right? So there are challenges. We haven't seen one option or the other really make a huge sway from a constructability standpoint on the impacts on the construction team. So, there are challenges with each, and they all will require an intense amount of planning. But in terms of the overall impact to construction, they're fairly neutral, one option to the other. So, okay. But it's a short-term duration for a beautiful thing that you're going to have a long time.
Yeah, I think that's my concern. If the contractor, the construction manager does see that it's not going to be neutral, that information be brought to us, okay, that we know what those are. Okay.
All right, thanks, Fred. Gwen, Jason, Susan, but Susan put her tent down. Are you okay? So Gwen, Jason, and Ian also put his tent down. So okay, and then Gabe. So Gwen, take it away.
All right. I guess it's maybe less of a question and more of a comment. I want to kind of underscore what Brian was alluding to around the kind of the elements of the bridge that become kind of its furniture fixtures. If we know we need a throw barrier, we know we need handrails, we know we need a certain amount of pedestrian and bicycle safety elements at the ends of the bridges as people are coming off the ramping on the bridge. And because we know we need those things, I'm hoping that the design team and the client are cognizant of those items and are really thinking about how they integrate into the final bridge design, and that we're intentional about how they're designed. You may not notice the chain link when you're driving by, but certainly when you're walking. And it became an afterthought because no one was thinking of that when the first Burnside Bridge was built. But now it's an issue, right? And we know it's an issue. So I'm hoping that as you guys are pushing through these designs, that we're remembering to take into account the holism of this bridge and all the FF&E stuff that gets forgotten sometimes.
Right. Thanks, Gwen. Any comments to that? Okay. Then we'll move over to Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to second some of Aaron's concerns. I do understand that we have to make a critical decision in the direction of the bridge, but it does seem, even though the east span and the longest span really is the most signature component of the bridge, it does seem a little bit short-sighted to be making that decision before we know some of the components of the rest of the design. And my bigger concern, I understand for us as a group why that needs to happen. My bigger concern is that you're going out for public input at this stage. So you're going out for public input on one component of 3 of a bridge. Most of the public are not, we've spent a lot of time looking at all of that and understanding the context. Most of the public are not going to understand that context. They're going to look at it as a finished bridge design. So it just seems, it does seem like we're jumping through a stage a little early. And especially then if we're serving people up 3 options of each of the bridge types. I'm concerned about, I don't question, I guess, I'm concerned about the value of the input that we get back if so much of the rest of the bridge direction is kind of undecided. I understand it for the course of the CDAG. I worry about it in terms of the public comment or public perceptions. I will say one thing that I'm really happy to see is what the county's been doing in terms of media build up to where we are at, and that's really, really focused on the length of the bridge being out of service, the bridge replacement. I was really, really shocked and disappointed to hear early on media reports while we were serving on the CDAG about retrofitting of the bridge to make it more stable in the case of an earthquake. It really was not representing what the project is all about.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. I think we have Gabe and then Susan.
So, I question the paintability of the...
Sorry, Gabe, will you just pull that a little closer to you? Thank you.
On the cable stay designs, like on the Tillamook, had we chosen to, could have the Tillamook been red, green, black? Or does the Teflon coating lend itself more to white for color choice?
But the original architect wanted it to be pink, so it would have been
It could have been whatever color. It's just, great. The other question I have is on the angles of the designs, both the tied arch and the cable stay, what those angles actually are in relation to the walking traffic and the driving traffic. And maybe that could just be a closer render of like a semi in that area where the angled, like on the angled cable stay that's a Y, what does it look like when a truck's right in there? To give us a better visualization of what those angles really look like.
I'm not sure I understand how you're using angles, like
the angles of the cables. The cables are going to come in at an angle.
Yeah, that would be a good Keith.
Yeah, I think that is a good Keith question. Keith, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Well, I think the answer is that the video will tell you that, because
perfect.
I've seen so far. I've seen a 1 3-second snippet of one option, but it happened to be responding exactly to that question, taking a driver's view, and of course, it's more illuminating than a fixed image could ever be. So hold fire, you'll see.
Perfect, thank you.
So there'll be infinite angles of, yeah. I might just make one comment about white, and I don't know if this is why the telecom is white, but birds have white stuff that, there's, and if you go to look at the East Bank, there's white, most marinas have white pile caps on the tops of them that are very steep, so birds can't perch. So white is kind of a universal color in certain
projects.
Okay, I'm going to move it over to Susan.
Well, if, a couple of things. If constructability means can it be constructed, then I guess I understand the concept of neutral. But if constructability means which is more challenging to construct, I have to say I'm skeptical that the cable stay and the tiered arch are neutral, or that they're the same. I find that hard to believe. So I'd like to be convinced that I'm wrong. And the second one is going out to the public. I was looking over the survey just briefly, and you kind of say, well, if you like the tiered arch ones, do you like the shorter one or the longer one? I think it might be helpful to provide, and I'm sure you're going to, but maybe to provide one thing that really got me thinking that the long one should be tossed is the idea that on the east end, if we built up the east end the way that it's allowed to be built up, that a lot of the east end of the long arch would be lost. It wouldn't even be visible from the freeway. There'd be sort of building kind of blocking it. So I think that might be very helpful to show the public, rather than thinking that everything is going to stay in stasis and that that nice long arch is going to be there like it is, because it won't be. It'll all be built up and it'll disappear. And that was one thing that made me feel very strongly that I preferred the shorter arch right away. Also because I wasn't told that there were any binding reasons to love the long arch. And I think the third one is, yeah, I think it's completely reasonable to want to, for this committee and maybe even the public, to get some basics on the west side. I mean, that it does seem that we're just sort of razor focused on getting a decision of whether, you know, are we going to do cable stay, are we going to do tiered arch, and which one are we going to do? And that makes sense to me because you guys know I'm not an architect, and I'm into getting the bridge built so that if the earthquake happens tomorrow, then the bridge will be there. So well, hopefully it won't happen tomorrow, but if it happens in 5 years, that the bridge will be there. But I think that it's completely reasonable for us to be at least reminded of what some of these west elements are, even if, you know, well, we looked at that several months ago. Maybe if we just had a sort of slide, oh, by the way, here's what was already decided about the west side, and here's kind of a little group about what's still being under consideration or going through, like what Carol was saying, you know, the whatever they're called, those giant French things in the middle of the water. Okay?
Thanks, Susan. I think Megan's going to chime in on this one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It took me a while to formulate this thought while I was listening to the question about why are we being asked to choose the east approach, not knowing the options on the two other pieces of the bridge. I just wanted to reiterate that there's not a suite of options that we're exploring for the movable span and the west approach. We've selected the bascule and then a girder style on the west approach. The additional work we need to do is on shaping the piers in the water, and then the supports under the west approach over the park area. And while that isn't something we feel ready to, we're ready to disclose to the public what options we feel are reasonable and feasible, we could share where we're at in the August meetings about the range of the options on the west side, and then where we are with the pier shaping in the operator tower. But I just wanted to clarify, if maybe it's not clear, that in general, the look above the deck is quite set. It's just these smaller details below the deck and then the piers in the water that we still need some time to refine.
Thanks, Megan. So a time check here. We're at 6:58, so almost 7 o'clock. We've got 20 minutes for this agenda item before we move into talking about the public engagement stuff. And so I do want to take pause and get a temperature check. We really want to look to this group about confirming the range of bridge types that go to the public that we've presented. There was some discussion last week. Susan's kind of brought it up again about the potential to remove the long arches for the sake of the public looking more at 6. So we just wanted to acknowledge that and allow space for that. And so we'll, in just a little bit, try to get a temperature check from all of you. Aaron, go ahead. Yeah, now's the temperature check. Let's go.
I think 6 options, or really 2, is enough.
Okay.
I would strongly encourage, especially after Susan's comments, I feel even more strongly that the long span shouldn't even be put up for conversation or consideration, and that by focusing in on the other 2, I think it's just a better path forward, and will probably give better feedback and more focused results.
Thank you, Aaron. Bob, and then Sarah.
I was hoping not to have to chime in so early on my preferences, but I'm, with respect to Aaron, in disagreement about the long span. From an urban design standpoint and some other aesthetic, I feel it's has value and is credible for some of the brace basket arch options. I'm not going to jump on my sword, die on that hill yet, because we still have more data, more visuals to see and to explore. But I want to say that I think it's viable long span to still stay in the battle and still be in consideration.
Thanks, Bob. Sarah?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Aaron on the long ones. I feel like it creates questions that don't need to be there about why there are 2 different lengths, and possibly creates questions around like the validity of the shorter ones. So I would prefer to take the long ones off the table.
Thank you, Sarah. Gwen?
I guess I have a follow-up question. I'm not sure what folks are going to see with this survey, right? Are they going to get the same amount of information that we have in this packet? Or are they, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that would help a lot. I mean, I think a lot of like going through options is about setting the table so people understand why there's a longer version. Like, what's the rationale for that? I think if I were, looking at it from a taxpayer's perspective, I'd be like, why do we need more material to do the same thing? Like, what's the purpose? So, there's a table setting that would have to be done in order to make including the long spans like useful or understandable to people, and that's pretty important. So I guess that's my comment about whether or not to push those forward.
Okay. Any other thoughts here on the topic? Valerie?
My wondering is, it sounds like we've heard material and potentially part of the bridge is blocked by a building. I'm wondering, are there any other downsides to the long option before deciding to take it off the table or leave it on the table?
Maybe I would go to Keith.
Well, interestingly, I mean, my take on this is probably different than everybody else in the room, if not on the planet. I think that the length is not a type issue, because I think if we were concentrating on type, we would then, as we run through the process and dig deeper, find if there were advantages both structurally and architecturally and constructionally, in fact, more so constructionally. So if we were electing a type now, I think that the size, the height, the length of each of these will vary a little bit as we go through the process. So I mean, if that informs you about whether to take them to the public, that's my take. But are there advantages? No, there are differences, and those I suppose for this forum could be visual rather than technical, because there's not enough hours in the day to kind of run through the nuances of those technical differences, I guess, would be my contribution to that conversation.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Okay, we're going to go Patrick, Susan, Anthony. Yes.
No worries. Just a couple of thoughts to add to the conversation. First, to Robert's comment, I do think that in general, I would prefer aesthetically the longer bridges and the larger piece. I think just in general, the bigger a statement it makes, I think the more iconic the bridge is. But I think that it's too much of a complication and too much of a nuance for this public outreach, and doesn't seem to bring any material benefit or immaterial benefit really to the project. I think it makes the construction bigger, which inevitably tends to make things somewhat more complicated. In my time as an architect, there have definitely been moments where somebody said, oh, it's the same as that, just a little bit this, or it's the same as that, just flipped it around the other way, and we thought, oh, that'll be simple. And it invites more complications than sometimes you might see at first blush. And so I don't think it's quite a simple choice. And I think as we go to the public, I agree, I think, with a few other folks here that 6 is plenty, and that it's best to keep the choices apples to apples. If we had 3 long spans and 3 medium spans, that might be simpler, but it seems like the long unbraced through arch was not a viable scheme, didn't pass through. And so for that reason, I think we should stick with just the 570-foot arched schemes for all of it. I think that's my take.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so some tents have gone up, and Aaron, yours is still up. I wasn't sure. Okay, thank you. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go Susan, Anthony, Gabe, Fred. Okay, Gabe. Susan, take it away.
Yeah, well, one of the things I remember from the early versions of this committee, when we were first talking about potentially preserving the existing bridge, was that one of the aspects that was really admired about the historic bridge that is about to come down is its openness. And I think that one of the things that I'm noticing in my thoughts about this longer arch, everything that people have said about it confusing to people, if I came to a public open house about it, I would want to know, well, what's the difference? I'd have a lot of questions we still do, right? We still are trying to understand the difference between the shorter one or the longer one. What does it really mean? And then it seems to come down to personal aesthetics, I guess. And then, so that's why I said, well, if we do go out with it, I'm not necessarily opposed to going out with it, but if we do go out with it, let's be sure that we have some real drawings and renderings that show what that'll look like when there's buildings that are allowed to be built up on the east side. But at the same time, I'm just sort of reminded about what we were trying to do in the beginning, which was in part try to replace some of the elements of the existing bridge, which was its openness. So I think that in putting on the longer arch, then it's kind of, there's more of an emphasis of a kind of a statement of, look at this big arch here, rather than here's this kind of pretty supportive arch, if that's the way it goes instead of the cable stay, but that is holding the arch up, but still there's still that just emphasis on the vast openness of the bridge, that someone can be on that bridge and feel very connected to all of the city. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, Anthony and then Gabe.
So, just my observation, I'm not sure that you're actually selecting people to go in the order that they put their tent cards up. It's just a personal observation. I don't think there's anything intentional. My thought doesn't really have anything to do with what everybody is saying. It's just something that I'd be curious to know. So I'd be curious to know who actually ends up making the decision about what things the public is going to see and vote on? Is it this group? Is it the project managers, the people who are the head ones in charge of things? Is it Keith? Who actually does make the decision? I'm assuming you're taking all of this input into account, but do we make the decision, or does somebody else? And if so, who?
Yeah, so the 8 options that came forth today was the sort of first pass. The county made the decision on those options coming to you all. And then it is with all of you to decide which ones then go to the public.
And I'll just add, we're using the same graphics that we're sharing with the CDAG. Those will be the same graphics incorporated into our online open house.
So we could decide. So we as a group could decide, let's not include the long arch options, or let's include the long arch options.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if there's some people in each camp, are we going to vote and it's just going to be majority wins?
We are going to do that today.
Okay.
Yeah. It's coming up next. Okay, and I am sorry if I'm getting these tents out of order. I'm now seeing Carol's is up, but I didn't see it until just right now. Behind Jackie's. Okay, thank you. So please help me. This is a team effort. Okay, so I think Gabe, and then Fred, did yours go down? Okay, thank you. Gabe, Jackie, Carol.
So in reference to the landings, that's the only possible benefit I could see on the long span. Would that afford any future benefit for an access to Second Avenue and below the bridge, besides just getting on the East Bank Esplanade, by having that landing land close to Second, as opposed to the short span, it's on the other side? There's still going to be some sort of support, I imagine, just west of Second.
You want me to go Steve on that, or do you want to do it?
Yeah, we actually were able to bring in Steve virtually. He's here. Maybe we'll use this as a good warm-up for Steve.
Steve, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So apologies, everybody, for being horribly late. So, and I did hear your question, Gabe. So in terms of the support location, the landing location, the shorter option would have a support that's closer to the railroad, putting in real terms. The longer option would have a support that's closer to Second Avenue. Neither of them would actually foster any sort of droppage down onto Second Avenue or in that space below. It's really just a matter of you're replacing an arch length with another type of extended girder on that side. So it's really just a matter of the extent of that type of over the deck structure versus having a continuation of a girder. So even on the shorter one, what we're really doing is adding a 100-foot steel span into the mix, generally bringing the cost a little bit down, still not outside of that whole range, which is why it's still in the mix for consideration. Helps with construction a little bit in terms of having that girder option versus the longer arch from a timing standpoint. But those are really the differentials. There's no incremental benefit in terms of access onto the ground. It's just a different way to span all the way across until you land where the bridge essentially lands today.
All righty, thanks, Steve. All right, Jackie, you're up.
So I'm just curious, because when Keith spoke to the lengths, it didn't seem that he gave us a very definitive answer about it. Like, it seemed like it was sort of up to change, like it could possibly change. So I'm curious, is it important that we talk about the length, or is it important that we talk about the shape? Is it possible that where the bridge span stops, or, from what Steve was talking about, that when we're in construction that could change. So are we focusing a lot of time and energy onto where the bridge ends versus type? And just saying like, hey, these are the two types. We're talking about, cable stay or tied arch, these different types of tied arch, these different kinds of pillars. And when we're in construction, it will either end here or possibly here. Because I wonder if all this focus on where the bridge ends is just more confusing than necessary, and how critical that is to this conversation or the information we send out to the public.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'm going to go Carol and then take a pause because we're getting close to time and I want to give us some time to take a vote.
Yeah, so we're talking about taking all of this to the public, and I'm very uncomfortable saying that we're going to hold back something from the public. I mean, we're talking about two types of bridges here. That's the discussion that we're having. I think the public deserves to see that. If I were the public and not on this committee and you invited me to a meeting, I'd like to see everything and be able to judge. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, let's see. We've got a little bit of time before we go to our next agenda item. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take a temperature check from all of you with our sort of voting mechanism. What we do here is we do a thumbs up, middle, or down. Up is I support the idea to remove the long arches. I am ambiguous. I don't have a strong feeling either way. I could live with it. Or down, no, I don't support that. And Aaron, do you have a comment? Yes.
Sorry, could I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
And maybe it's a modification of my temperature from previously. I guess I just wanted to say that in my statement about removing the two long spans, I was more interested, and I think in what Keith better articulated about focusing on type more than focusing on all the variations. And so I think to the previous points that, that I would like to leave that on the table as an option down the road. I don't want to cut that off as a possibility, but really I think it's just about focusing our decision-making on types is really what I'm interested in.
Okay. Ian.
So off the top of my head, I want to give the public all of the options. I 100% agree with Carol on that. Like, I think that these are the options that are available to them. They should have a chance to look at them. I do think that requires, to borrow Gwen's terminology, better table setting on the survey. I find that the more information you give people up front about the decision they're making, the easier it is for them to make it. And as we get into developing the survey and the information that's going to go out on that, I'd like to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Okay, I'm just gonna ask everybody to just do it all together, kind of give me where you're feeling, either an up, a middle, or a down. Just before I do, the way we do this is a majority, so 75% of this group, something moves forward. If we're less than that, then we don't. That is according to our charter, how we've laid it out.
Can you clearly just state the question?
Okay, so.
Clarify what the proposal is?
Yes, okay. So an up is I support the removal of the long spans in going to the public, so just going with 6 to the public. I can live with, the middle is I can live with that. I'm ambiguous, I'm not feeling strongly about that. Or down, which is no. And I will say that the sort of middle ambiguous is sort of, it leans into the support category. So sort of an up and middle is more or less you're okay with it. I can live with it. I can live with it. Even if you're not.
Are you saying that we're believing that we keep both long and short, or I guess I don't understand what we're
Okay, so thumbs up, because it came up to the proposal to remove the two long arches. So we want to hear that and say, we're hearing some people that say, yeah, I support that, I want to do that. And some people that say, you know, I can live with that. I might not I don't love it, but I can live with it. Or down as you express that you're uncomfortable with it. Okay? Well, we're going to just, everybody put your vote up. We're going to do it as a visual group here. So we're going to do it all together. Yeah, go for it. And hold it up. And hold it up. We've got 1, 2, 2 sideways. Keep your thumbs up. Keep your thumbs up. Okay, 1 up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ups, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Did I get that right? So there's.
Oh, those are sideways.
Please put your thumbs up again. Okay. I've definitely got 2 sideways. You can put those down. Okay. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 thumbs ups. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that up or down, Fred? Was it up or down before? Okay, you can put it down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. That is not a majority vote. 10, 11, 12 to 6. It was very close. It was 1 away, actually, because 5 would be 25% of this group. So I do just want to take a little pause. I did hear some folks with their thumbs down very clearly. I just want to see if anybody else just has any last words on this topic and wants to. Yes, Patrick. Yeah, sorry.
I think maybe if we are going to bring all the options to the public, I think talking about how that's framed would, I think, be helpful for the group. So in my mind, I would like it, if I were to have it presented to me, I would want it to say, of these 3 cable stayed, which ones do you like best? Of these longer arches, which one do you like best? And overall, do you prefer a cable stayed or an arch, so that we can get the feedback on the nuances of the variations, but also a general preference of one type versus another, kind of getting back to what Keith was saying before. So I think if we're bringing these, I think the framing of the questions and the table setting will just be really important.
Okay, well, hey, that was awesome. You guys did a vote, and Jackie, I'm sorry.
I wonder if this is the most effective way to show that you have a question.
Right.
I just wanted to say I voted no only because I felt like we didn't really have a conversation about maybe we want to keep the long one versus the short one, right? It really kind of just swayed over to let's get rid of the long version. And I think that was my concern, was I don't know that either one is necessarily better when we're talking about that. Both had things. And so I felt like if we're going to talk about them, we might as well just talk about them, right? So.
Fred.
Yeah, I just wanted to say why I voted to remove it, because I was actually earlier leaning towards liking the longer arch. What Keith said, that it's a good 20 feet higher, and to me that was more impressive, as when I was going to be comparing it to the cable stay. But when Steve spoke to some issues of installing a girder span in the first section, to the actual landing, I said, that's going to really impact one of my concerns in constructability. I saw and he mentioned the word cost, and for that reason, I switched to eliminate the third option.
Thanks, Fred. Help me out here. Okay, I was going to go Gwen, but I'm questioning myself these days.
I was deferring. I was going to let you do that job. I voted to remove, partly because I think we could take length off the table as something that we need to talk to people about. But I understand, the idea to give people all the ideas. I mean, I was just thinking, if in the final design it ends up being 600 feet long and either 520 or 720, it's something in the middle. I don't want people coming back and saying, but you said it was going to be 700. I mean, it seems like it's not really something we have dialed in yet anyway. So I was looking to decomplicate.
Gabe?
Could the question to the public be rephrased so it is only the 6 options they're looking at, and then there's just a little subtext that says also possible in a, without this extra graphic? Or do we just show the public the long span with the crossing girders and the basket, with the short span, the dual arches? Just to simplify it, so they're just looking, because they're only choosing shape. Well, what are we saying?
I think that's what I said, is that why don't we just focus on shape? And I think some people felt like it's dishonest if we don't give people the full length, if we don't talk about the difference in the lengths and where things will land. I don't think that's particularly important, because I think until we actually construct the bridge, I think that everything's kind of up for grabs. And I think for us to give people an option that may not really be a real option isn't necessarily helpful. But I think but if we are going to do that, I think we should give them everything, right? If we're going to say it, let's say it all. But I think that it's disingenuous at this point to focus on length. I think you could talk about, like, there's a possibility, depending on when we do construction, like it might end here, it might end there. I think you can have those conversations, and I think sometimes we're in this committee, and I'm spending years at this point on this committee. And I think it's so easy to get lost in the minutia. And I think that there are some folks in the public who will be into the minutia. And it is a very small percentage of folks. And for those folks, they will chat with Steve, and they will chat with the people who are there, and they will engross themselves in these conversations. But for most people, I think it really is about kind of shape and impact and that kind of stuff. And so they might have interesting things to say about impact and about where they'd like to see the bridge. And I think you can have those conversations, but I think for most folks, it's really going to be about aesthetics and about view and about what the experience of the bridge is going to be like for them and what it's going to mean for the future in terms of what it looks like in our city. And I think when you complicate it with stuff that may not be real, so if everyone says, I really think it should be 720 feet, and then the bridge is not 720 feet, like, it just seems to me that we're focusing on exact figures that are not exact figures necessarily.
Thank you, Jackie. Gabe, you're good? Okay. Sarah.
I just wanted to kind of back up what Jackie was saying. Part of the reason I voted to take the longer ones off is that I do think we should be focusing more on shape at this point. And I think adding in the length options, it's cluttering the message. And I think it's going to make it harder for the public to really want any of the arch options. I think sometimes when you add in variations, it creates a little bit of confusion and lack of clarity of whether or not it's even a viable option.
Okay. Do we want to do it again? Did any of the additional conversation move the needle for anyone? I really want to.
Different, right?
Okay.
I think it's a different option.
I think I'm a little confused by that.
I like the look you're giving me, Cassie. I'm like, no, I said I think like this conversation is a different conversation. It's not a conversation about like having a long span and a short span option. It's a conversation of having a tied arch versus a cable stayed option, and really de-emphasizing the length. And maybe you say like it's possible it could be this long or this long, but not emphasizing that as a whole different type of bridge. I think that's the conversation we're having. not a thumbs up, thumbs out about the same questions you asked. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's interesting.
Is that what other people are understanding what's happening in the room?
That's what I was saying.
So we can absolutely, in the online open house, have a footnote or a comment that says these options are also available in a larger size. You can supersize the art. So in a way, you can share with the public what's on the table without, with maybe trying to minimize confusion and keeping the conversation about type and not scale. But the question is on the table is, are we asking the public to just consider type? And that would be the 6 options with the footnote, or type and scale, which is the 6 plus 2 options.
Bob.
Ooh. Thank you for throwing in scale. I think that's a very important consideration. And type, right, but for this bridge, for the civic, monument, for something that's going to last for a long time, I want to make darn sure I've considered every, viable option that I understand it. That's why I'm still kind of holding back my punches. I need more data as to what it really looks like. But civic scale is an extraordinarily important part of this bridge's consideration. For me, maybe even more important than just the type of cable stayed or tied arch and the variations of tied arch. So that's why I want to have our public also be given that opportunity to be thinking about the civic scale of the bridge and the permutations.
Okay. I will say we're over time on this agenda item, but I did just connect with Megan really quick on this topic as we're going through it, because I'm hearing this mix between keep it simple with the public, let's focus on the 6 types and not go into too much additional confusion with longer, shorter versions. But do want them to know about that. So either, going with the 6, but letting them know that there's a short and a long option there, and bringing that, what I talked to Megan about, bringing that then back to you, and the longs would still be part of your process for recommendation. We just wouldn't kind of pitch it like there's 8 options, there's 6 with 2 or 2 of them have, the ability to go short or long. So I'm seeing some head nods. I see some questions. I'm going to hit these 3 questions, and I'm going to take another temperature check. So Jackie, Fred, and then Aaron.
Mine's a simple question. Is the public going to decide? So when we send this out to the public, are they going to say, I really want the long span basket tied arch, and that's the decision? Or is it that we're just testing the public and getting their feedback to bring back to this group?
It's for you. It's for this group.
Okay.
So we're getting that as additional information for you all. We bring you technical stuff, we're going to bring you stuff from the public, and then you all make that recommendation.
Okay.
Fred and then Aaron.
Robert, I don't know if you've looked ahead at the survey questions. Question 10 addresses scale. So I think they've done a fine job of us, that the public can comment that way and tell us what their preference is there. So it's still in there. We can decide to eliminate that question or leave it in.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, Aaron, and I'm going to do another temp check.
I just wanted to kind of restate what I think I heard you say, which I like this, I don't know if it's a compromise, but I like this reframing that maybe Robert's making about changing the question and focusing it on 2 issues about type and scale. I think could be a really good way to go about this. For instance, I think the diagram on page 15, if all mentions of length were taken off of here and only showed 6, you could very clearly focus on type and then have a follow-up question that is completely separate, that is about scale or length or however you'd want to phrase that. And I think in that case, I could be supportive of showing all these options, just not as a sort of singular menu that you're choosing from one moment.
Okay, so Jackie, I got your question, right? You did. Okay, so I'm gonna do another round here, and the question here now is putting forth the six types with recognition of that 2 of them have the option to be longer. Now, this is opposed to going, there's 8 options. Okay, does everyone understand that? Okay, so up means you support the 6 with explaining that 2 of them have an option of short and long. Okay, let's go. I think we figured it out. I didn't even need to count that. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. That's what you're here for, to help us do this work. So thank you. That was, consensus building. Thanks, you guys. Okay, now Sarah's gonna come up here and walk us through some of the survey questions that I'm so glad some of you have looked at already. So we'll try to, we are gonna steal the public comment 5 minutes because there's no public comment. And so Sarah will be walking us through the public engagement activities and the survey questions. The survey questions are really, we've worked with professionals that have written these kinds of surveys for these types of projects for a long time. They're really meant to get you information that would be helpful for helping you make your recommendation. So let us know how we did there. And Sarah, take it away.
Hello. I was chuckling because a lot of what you guys were just talking about, I was like, this is such a good segue for what I'm about to talk about. Okay, so let's go to the, first slide. So we will be getting into a lot of the things that you guys were just touching on, specifically with the survey and the online open house. I do want to give you a lot of clarity about kind of the structure and what we're really hoping to do with the public on that. But I'm going to start with some of the exciting things. So we have several outreach events that we will be hosting throughout the input period. And these are designed to get the community involved, both in person and online. The first, obviously, and this is all centered around the survey and the online open house. We're targeting a late June, potentially early July launch for the online open house and survey. We're still kind of locking down that date at this point. And then once that launches, we have several of these events. So a webinar is essentially a virtual option to talk to our project leaders, ask questions. We'll talk about the design options that are on the table for folks. And this basically just gives an online option for people who might not be able to come and meet us in person, because we have some in-person opportunities. So we have 2 of those. One we're going to do kind of during the lunch hour, and another, after work hours. The next thing, which we're really, really stoked about, we're calling it a night out with the Burnside Bridge team at OMSI. This will be a live panel where I'll be moderating, and we'll have people representing all of the different kind of facets of the project. So we'll have our transportation director, then we'll have our lead design. Steve will be there, Steve Drahota. Then Jen will be there as well. And then we are going to have at least Gwen and potentially Brian there as well to kind of represent the community design advisory group perspective. I'll lead the group through several questions, kind of talk about the unique nature of this project, and this is designed again for people to come in person, learn about the project. It's also kind of snazzy, it's in a lounge, and we'll have refreshments. So that's also during this public input.
Sarah, one quick thing, I wanted to say a little shout out to Carol. Thank you so much in helping us coordinate and be able to be at OMSI. Yeah, thank you.
Our OMSI connection, yay. And then Breakfast on the Bridge. So if you're not familiar with Breakfast on the Bridges, which is a cycling group that has breakfast every last Friday of the month on various different bridges in Portland, we're partnering with Breakfast on the Bridges to do a special event on the Burnside Bridge. So that's on July 12th. We'll be giving out donuts, coffee, And again, the whole idea is to drive people to the survey and the online open house. So we'll have like postcards with QR codes to drive people to take the survey. And then we'll also be doing a tabling event at Portland Saturday Market and a couple of other places as well where people can learn about the project. Next slide, please.
And a shout out to Eric on that one. Woo! Thank you.
We do also have several briefings that this project is doing, but two that we thought this group might be interested in learning more about or going to. We have the City of Portland Historic Landmarks Commission and Design Commission, so that's June 10th at 1:45. We will also be briefing the American Institute of Architects on June 18th. So if anyone on this group wants to learn more, participate or come to these, then we can provide more information to you.
Those are both virtual, is that correct?
I don't know. Are they? They're both virtual.
Yeah.
So
you
that's
can
easy.
Attend easily.
Yeah. Next slide, please. We'll also be working with our community engagement liaison program. If you're not familiar with this program, these are folks who speak the native language of various different non-English speaking communities. They have rapport that they've built in their communities, and we'll basically be asking similar survey questions with these groups so that they can also provide input during the input period. Next slide, please. All right, so if you have in your packet, you can take a look at these questions up close. But I first wanted to give you a little bit of preface about what we plan to do before people get to these actual survey questions, because it seemed like there was a lot of questions about that. So we will be providing an overview of the project. There's a lot of learning that people get to do specifically about the bridge types and the sub options. And so they have all kinds of descriptions in them before people even get to the questions. So it's not like they're just taking these questions blindly and looking at, two pictures of a sub option or a bridge type, and that's all we're providing. So that the goal is to give them as much educational opportunity before they answer the questions. So here's the questions that we have developed for the survey. After reviewing the information on the two east span bridge types, which bridge type do you feel would be the best option for our city? So there, they get to tell us whether they prefer the tied arch or the cable stay. And then what impacted your decision in selecting that bridge type? I'm not going to go through all of the options, but these are all tied to the guiding principles for this group. Next slide. As we go further through the survey, are there other reasons why you prefer this over this bridge type? And it's open-ended, so people can write in and explain. The bridge concept, so this, whatever they preferred, has multiple sub-options. Please place the sub-options below in order of preference from most preferred to least preferred. So this is ranked choice. And then which characteristics most impacted your rankings of the sub-options? And again, these are tied to guiding principles. We keep going. Next slide, please. Would you like to be able to leave comments about essentially the other bridge type that they didn't prefer? So we are providing an opportunity for people to give input on both, even if they tell us they preferred one over the other. So please tell us why you decided not to choose this bridge type and why. And so they're similar, essentially they take you through this similar course of questions. Next slide. Yeah, so which characteristics impacted your rankings of those sub-options? And then this next one, 10 distinct difference between the long and short versions of the basket handle and braced vertical arch. Is the scale, I'm confused by this question. Which do you prefer and why? So essentially, it's asking the question that we've all been talking about. Do you like the shorter? Do you like the longer one? And then we also leave an open-ended option at the end. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the East Span Bridge design concepts that are being considered for the new Burnside Bridge? So we try to be as specific as possible. We also know from the county perspective that the Board of Commissioners, who is ultimately making that final decision on the bridge type in the fall, is going to want to have this type of data. So also, and I've been able to kind of clarify this for Fred, but just want to reiterate and help the group maybe understand that we want you to feel that you have the best tools to make the best recommendation collectively, and the public input, this survey, is part of that. So your recommendation goes to the project team takes all of that and gives it to the Board of Commissioners in the fall.
Okay, we've got a few questions. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to go Aaron, Ian, and Jason just around the table here.
Just a quick question about, for example, I guess number 2 and the questions that have multiple options. How maybe you can speak to how the order that those are presented in is chosen, and because I think that does kind of weight things a little bit, and I guess if there's some attempt to kind of prioritize certain types of answers over others, and I wonder why it wouldn't be something more like just alphabetical.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Cassie, do you want to tackle it?
Yeah, you know, honestly, we were going with Beam's expression of these things to you from the last meeting. So the way in which they sort of presented and walked you through those, similar in some of the ways that we explain things on the website. So kind of expressing some overarching differences in terms of height and material and things like that. So that's sort of what we were basing it off of, but you know, we're open to rearranging those.
I guess I would just say that it definitely emphasizes form considerations over experience by putting those 2 on either ends of that spectrum, and one towards the end near none or whatever. There's a kind of negative just below it. But
you know, Aaron, actually, Carol and I were just talking about this, the order of them, and so I appreciate you bringing this up. We're going to huddle and talk about that. Thank you. Okay, Ian and then Jason.
One quick thing I noticed about question 2 is there's a question about cohesion. We don't even know what that is yet because we don't have all that information. So we can ask the public that, but they also don't have that information. So I don't know if there's a good reason to have that choice in that question. And I had another thought, but it has escaped my mind. I'll put my tent back up if I remember it.
Okay, thank you. Jason, and then Gabe.
Yeah, is there any reason why we would have people sort the 2 categories separately as opposed to all 6 forms and put them into order? Because I know for myself, I would not necessarily choose all of the tied arch over all of the other. So I think it would be better to actually have them sorting their preferences as a whole set, as opposed to 2 subsets. Otherwise, you're really making them make a decision as opposed to express preferences.
Okay, I'm going to go Gabe and then back to Ian. Okay, Ian.
Brain came back on. So in the table setting for these questions, I think it would be helpful if the public understands that these are not finished renderings. These are very basic type forms, and that what they are looking at is not what the bridge will look like in its finished state. Just so they know.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. Great feedback. Sarah, nice work. Where are we at? 7:48. Yes. Okay. We've made some decisions here. We've talked through some great ideas we're going to take into the survey. You know, we got Steve back on the line. So we wanted to actually go back to Gwen and answer your question on sheeting. And he's going to go ahead and pop up and answer that, and then we'll head to the rest of this meeting.
So I think that it's better put that it's a staining problem, right? I was thinking about water sheeting off of the weathering steel and the staining that happens when that happens. So you see that on buildings around town that have fun weathering steel elements, and inevitably the sidewalk underneath them, and sometimes the foundation, windowsills, other stuff underneath that steel becomes stained. So my question was, what's the thought process around that? What's the consideration? You know, are we gonna just tint the whole bridge rust colored just to take care of it right away, or what are we thinking about there?
Yeah, well, you bring up a really good point. The patina itself, that rusty patina that forms as a byproduct of the fabrication process is there. It does over time rust. And so as the design team, we have to be very thoughtful with the details of catching that water that carries that rust. And without some really good details, some of them very difficult to actually implement, then you do get that staining effect over time. So it's one of the things we're considering. It's inherent that to one of these weathering steel options. The reality is it's very difficult to mitigate that 100%. It's certainly something we'll be contemplating, especially in those areas where it's obvious to the bicycles, pedestrians in a bike pedestrian space, or what happens to the roadway surface. So we try to catch that, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge that comes with a weathering steel solution. So at this point, it's too early in the design to be able to talk about the specific details. We know it's one of those considerations that we have to work with. And to be honest, we will do the best that we can, but the likelihood is that there will be some sort of, call it very minor rusting as a byproduct over time. So I think you bring up, it's a point that's just inherent to a weathering steel material.
Thank you. Aaron?
I just wanted to ask a follow-up, which I think is a question you asked earlier, which was, does the graffiti removal over 100 years cause any problems for the steel? I think that was it.
Based on the literature, we found the answer is no. You do have to form sacrificial thickness when you have weathering steel that you don't consider structural, so it's okay. So from a structural standpoint, we don't see any evidence of any kind of problems, even as long as 100-year life, again, forecasted, because there really aren't a whole lot of, whether it's steel 100-year-old elements, but forecasted through experimentation. We do know that the truth is when you're cleaning the graffiti off of weathering steel, it can leave a clouding effect. And frankly, there's places in Portland where you can kind of see that. So there's, there's some process to do that, but you don't get a perfect match of the patina after you clean it from the graffiti. Truth is, it's probably kind of the same way when you're talking about concrete too. So it's one of the challenges with graffiti artists. There's ways to minimize it, but completely avoiding it or having it be the exact same as opening day is basically nearly impossible to have, short of, for concrete, repainting an entire concrete structure.
Thanks, Steve. Gabe?
Just a clarification on the construction of the weathering steel in the arches. The undercarriage of that bridge section would still be the concrete. It would not be a weathering steel ceiling underneath the bridge, correct?
Actually, when we say weathering steel, we mean the entire perimeter around the beam members. So if you can see, if it's exposed, then at this point, we're contemplating it being an exposed weathering steel surface. Now, there are things that we haven't talked about, all the details that go with the project yet. We're looking at basic form at this point when we talk about type selection at this early stage, especially focused on the east approach. So there's the possibility of doing some work on the soffit or the underside of the bridge to mask that. But at this point, I think the simple answer is it's not a given. And if there is exposed steel, it would likely have the look and feel of weathering steel unless another solution presents itself down the road.
Thanks, Steve. Brian?
Yeah, that's kind of my question. Oops, sorry, I just lost the felt. It feels like are we stuck with weathering steel? I mean, it just seems like, I don't know, we have a brand new bridge and it's going to be rusty. It's not a, you know,
If you choose that type.
well, what do you mean?
If you choose the thing,
Well-
if you choose the tied arch.
But it doesn't have to be weathering steel. It could be it could be, you know, you can, you know, put a finish coat on it. You can put a sleeve over it. You know, there's different ways of doing it. My concern about the weathering steel is that this is going to be the newest thing in town, and it's the biggest thing in town, and it's probably the most expensive thing in town, and it's rusty. I don't know how the public's going to react to that, but you know, that's just one of the concerns that I would have.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, we're down to the last few moments here. There is one more slide to present to you all. So Twin, if you want to go to the next slide, we can go right through public comment and go to our next steps. So we want to talk about when we get back together with you in August. Do you want to do it?
Yeah. I'll just go very briefly because I think Cassie wanted to do a quick round robin before we adjourn today. So just a reminder, as Sarah mentioned, we're going out to the public for a month, closing our public comment period by the end of July. We're going to have a very quick turnaround to come bring to you a synthesis of what we heard and additional information that I think we've heard today that we would like to report back on. The intent is to meet once a week for 3 weeks. And I'm hoping this is okay with the group. We feel like we want to keep the momentum. We want to make this decision as quickly as possible, but of course, provide the group as much time as needed to come to a recommendation. I think this space is going to be under renovation in August to fix the lighting and technical issues, but we have a very large intimate conference room in the second floor, so we'll have to work with you on communicating the new logistics around that. But it's actually a nice space. You feel more it's really great for conversations, so I think it'll really support our August work. We'll definitely send out a notification to this group when the online open house does launch, and so you'll be in the know. And I believe so. If there's any questions about this process as we move towards making a decision in September, happy to answer those.
Yeah, Valerie.
Yeah, it seemed like there was an earlier meeting with us all where the question was presented of whether we wanted to do like more hours together on one day versus 3 separate or many separate dates. And I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason we'd have to meet for 3 different times in 3 weeks rather than spend more time together fewer days.
Yeah, we went with that because of the feedback we got last time of a preference to not do longer meetings and to not do weekends. So we went with more frequency.
I will just say, as somebody who doesn't live close and traffic is really bad getting here, it just is not ideal.
Okay, great. Thank you, Valerie. Ian?
One quick question. We've got the public outreach coming up, and I asked last week if it would be possible to get flyers, or so that I have a staple hammer. I'll go around and put them up everywhere. Fantastic. So if there is a way that I can get those, just let me know when and where.
Yes, we will follow up with you, and we can get those to you for sure.
And really quick too, if I didn't mention, all of those events, please come to. Invite your friends, your family. Like, that's the whole idea, right? And be sharing. Like, we'll have all kinds of flyers, so we can divvy them out, you know, to the group. The idea is to get as many voices as possible.
All right. I'm going to wrap us up. Oh, wait, Neil.
Add me to Ian's, yeah.
Say that again?
I said, add me to Ian's flyer.
Okay. Okay, Jackie and then Gabe. Sorry, Gabe, Jackie's gonna.
Just for these meetings, these 3 meetings, is there going to be a virtual option, or could we make one of them virtual, or do they all need to be in person? I'm just asking because I know for at least one of them I will be at a convention.
So our preference is for us to meet in person. It's just more engaging. But if you are going to be out but could still attend virtually, we would rather you be here virtually than not at all.
Are there any local examples of weathering steel? Isn't the Selwood? Or
Yes.
Telecom and TriMet, and we've got a bunch of bridges.
The
on
Telecom is?
Probably north of here.
That people could actually go and look and see, you know, what's the effect of this?
The orange line approaches to the Telecom have weathering steel beams, right, that are horizontal.
If you're down in Milwaukee, there's crosses 99.
But that could be a good example, like, what's the effect on the roadway of having a material like that?
Yeah.
So all our bridges, it's only
It's the approaches that carry, right, the train, right? The flyways that had the MAX have this weathering steel. I'm going to use the wrong word, but I think it's a girder underneath. And so it crosses a lot of other public infrastructure underneath. There's sidewalks and streets, and yeah, you could probably get what's going on there. It's piers.
Keith, did we see your hand go up there?
Yes, you did, just listening, and now I'm going to expose my ignorance in pronunciation, but the Wapato Bridge,
Wapato.
give a good impression of that. It's a weathering steel arch. And that's in Multnomah County, so that's
Salvi's Island Bridge.
Thanks, Keith.
Sorry.
Go ahead, keep going.
No, that's it. That's what I have. That's the best example local to you.
That's a good example. Yeah, the Wapato Bridge going over to Savi Island.
Okay. Thank you for that pronunciation correction. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we're at 8:01.
We don't have to do
Okay, we wanted to do some round robins, but and hear how everybody's feeling. But what we are going to do is we're going to send out a little online survey form, just checking in with all of you about how things are going and everything. Okay, so that'll come after this meeting. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great summer. We'll see you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Arbitrary or? Yeah.